All right. Just hang out a bit. Hey! How you doing, Mark? And there's the dog. Dogs, plural. Plural dogs. Yeah. Doing good. How you doing, man? Just waiting a minute. To make sure all of this is working. And then I will be on. Good, man. I'm also trying to do this before the sun goes down behind me, because it is quite odd when that happens. So I'll go ahead and get on with the show here, because honestly, after recording the show and then having it not work was enough to send me to the nut house. So I kind of need everyone's support here. And I'm having bad internet stuff. Wonder if yeah, I probably could do that, but I won't. Okay, so I'll just keep on keeping on. Alright. Welcome, everyone, to the greatest show on earth, the Pulp Fiction Literary Podcast, Volume 2, Episode 2. I say Volume 2 because, in case you don't know, I tried doing this show another time with a different format. And, yeah, so this is how it's going now. So, today we are going to kind of go over some, you know what, let's focus this a little bit more. We're going to talk a little bit about Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, because that's what I've been reading this week. We're going to talk about Pentathon, week 4, which is the hard-boiled or noir type thing, and Distracted by My Dogs. And then we are going to have a overview on Barsoom as a whole. And that is another reason why I will eventually have to get up. But yeah, so if you are listening to the audio of this, I am recording this live on YouTube because I've already recorded this episode and I lost it. So, I needed some feedback, or the attempt at having some feedback, in order for me to not completely lose my mind in re-recording this. And if this works out well, then I'll just keep doing it like this. And hello, Aphrodite. And feel free, anyone watching live, to comment or chat amongst yourselves or add things, because especially with the Foundation series, I have some questions. So, I guess we'll get right into it. But first, let me do this. Alright, that was confusing. Okay, I just had to grab some stuff. And I'm all ready to go. So, Fred, hello, how you doing? Do you want to say hi to all the nice people? No? Okay, well, you might have to get down in a second because you're really distracting. Okay, so, first off, I want to let everybody know that Weird Mask issue 4 is out. It's the biggest one yet. It has Deja Thors on the cover from A Princess of Mars. You could get this at weirdmask.com. I just want to go over real quick. You know what? I'll do a more thorough go over in a bit. But look, it even comes with a mask. Yeah, so you now can be the Princess of Mars. So, since I know most of you have always wanted to do that, it is now a thing. And thank you. Good, I'm glad people like the cover. It's really annoying when people don't. Fred. Yeah. Okay, so, what I've been reading lately, with the whole Pentathon thing going on, last week was Robert E. Howard, and instead of reading Conan or Solomon Kane or Cole, I tried reading some of the boxing fight stories of Sailor Steve Costigan, which were better than I thought they were going to be. I was told they were good, but I still didn't think. Thanks, Steve. Oh, and by the way, that Superman guy, he's not from Gotham, so he means nothing to me. So, yes, that's where I was. And I also read a spicy story called She-Devil. And if you want to read any of this stuff, you could go to Wikisource and just type in Robert. I think you have to type in Robert Irving Howard in order to get that to pull up with all his stuff on there. But a lot of his stuff's public domain, so it's kind of cool. But the Foundation series, I this week read Foundation and Empire, Second Foundation. And I was going to leave it at that. But, in case people weren't aware, Robert E. Howard did not commit suicide in the front seat of his car. It was Steve Donahue. So, now that that case has been solved, we could get on to the Pentathon Week 4 of Hard-Boiled and Noir. But, so I read those three, and then I had this, which is Foundation's Edge, which is the next book in the series that I guess Del Rey kind of forced him to write. That might not be 100% accurate, but I feel like on some of the stuff I looked up about it, it feels like that's what happened. And I really like this. It was written like 20 years after the other three. And I didn't think I was going to really enjoy this, but I actually really did. And Trevize was actually kind of a fun character. And then dang it. And then I read, I finished reading today, Foundation and Earth, which Foundation's Edge and Foundation and Earth are like the last two of the series that Asimov wrote, although there are two other books that came out after that he wrote, which are Prelude to Foundation and Forward Foundation, which are prequels. Now, a couple things about the Foundation series. I stayed away from these for so long, and I honestly think it was just because the title, the title wasn't great. Like, it didn't, like, jump out and stab you in the face, because, again, I'm used to more pulpy stuff, so, like, I want, like, the moon of the laser's eyeball or something like that. So, Foundation, that's the bottom of a building. You know, it's like, it wasn't anything that, like, made me super excited. But the more other things that I read, and the more I read about certain writers and stuff, the more, take care. The more I felt I needed to read the books. So I read Foundation, and I loved it. If you don't know what it's about, let me see, how can I make this really short? Okay, it's basically, you take the Galactic Empire, thousands of years into the future, like 20,000 years into the future. There's this Galactic Empire, and this guy named Harry Selton says, he's a mathematician, a scientist, but he's like, I've been doing the calculations here, and there's no way that the Galactic Empire can sustain itself for another, like, 5 years. So, of course, he's tried with treason, and, or tried for treason, and they don't want to make him a martyr and all this other junk. So, what they basically do is send his people, the Foundation, to a planet that's barely livable on the F side of the galaxy, and they're told to just do their work there. And then the books go in, like, little periods of time. And the first book, my dogs. The first book, I guess, is 4 stories that he wrote for Astounding Science Fiction, I think. And the beginning story, which explains all of this and what's going on, was written for the inclusion for a book. So it's like a fix-up kind of thing, how they used to do. And I really, really liked that first bit, and was really bummed out that we didn't get more of, what was that character's name? Anyway, I can't remember his name. That was earlier in the week. But, so then I read Foundation and Empire, and the first bit of it was cool, because Hardin from the first book is a really great character. I really, really like him. And so his little bit in the beginning of that book, I think, I think that was in Foundation Empire, was really, really good. The second bit, and this bit kind of goes on through the rest of the books, introduces this character called the Mule, and I really wasn't feeling it, and I wasn't feeling really the characters that were in it, and it was really weird, and I didn't know how I felt about it. And then I thought it ended with a dick joke. Hey, you guys have to stop, okay? Come on. I thought it ended with a dick joke, and it was like all serious and all real and everything, and then I'm like, that can't be a dick joke. And it, like, I'm not saying like, oh, and it ends with a dick joke, like it's kind of in the last chapter. Like, the last thing that happens is this thing that could be a dick joke. And so I go on Google, and I'm like, did Asimov tell a dick joke? And it was like, before I could even finish it, like, Google answered it for me. And there were just tons of people talking about it. So, apparently, it wasn't supposed to be, but I kind of feel like it was told in a way as like kind of like a tongue-in-cheek jab kind of deal. But apparently, because of something that's said in Second Foundation, which is the third book, it kind of deflates the idea of that being a dick joke. I didn't even mean to do that. That was pretty funny. So, Second Foundation I liked. I enjoyed it. And when I looked at the trilogy, and I guess that's how Asimov really wanted it to be, it made sense as a whole, and I did really like it. When Foundation's Edge comes around, he tries to start weaving all of his worlds together, all of his, like the robot series, and things like that, into the, into the worlds of, the Galactic Empire and the Foundation and all that stuff. So that's cool. Like, I dig it. Like, it's a neat thing. But my biggest problem is, and I know people are gonna get mad at me for saying this, but after reading Foundation's Edge and then immediately reading Foundation and Earth, we have the main characters the same for the most part. Like, we have Treves. Such a hard name to say. That's one of the things about science fiction and fantasy that has always irked me. Like, I have a hard enough time reading English as it is. Like, why do you gotta go off and make names super hard to read and pronounce? So anyway, we have Treves, and we have, oh my gosh, I've been reading it for 2 days now. The guy, what do you call him? Help me, basically the historian on Earth. I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head. And we have Bliss, from Gaia, which is kind of spoiler, sorry about that. But the thing is that that Treves from Foundation's Edge to Foundation and Earth, even though it's supposed to be like right after, it seems like a completely different character. His mannerisms are different. No, the guy from Terminus who is with him, it's not Harry. It's, let me see if I can just find it real quick, because that's gonna make me lose it. I need to go up and grab the other book, is what I should do. Pellerat. Genove Pellerat of Terminus. That is the guy who's with him. I bet it says it on the back. And I just went through all of that for nothing. So anyway, oh my gosh. It seems to me like Foundation and Earth might have been written by somebody else. Like a pen name or something. Not a pen name, but like a ghostwriter. And I know that's probably heresy, and I shouldn't say it, but I don't know how else to describe it, because Treves is like kind of whiny, kind of entitled, really rude, and he wasn't really any of those things in Foundation's Edge. And I know like 3 years maybe passed between the writing of the two, but still, like, I mean, talking about Asimov, we're not talking about like Billy next door. You are in so much trouble. I know! I feel bad saying it, but it was like, I loved Treves in Foundation's Edge, and really, really disliked him in Foundation and Earth. And then I started looking up, like, just things people said about Foundation and Earth to see if anyone else said anything like that. And this reviewer said that Foundation and Earth is all talk and no action, but it's Asimov talk, so it's okay. And I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. I'm really excited that I think the other two books deal with Harry Seldon. Like, I'm crossing my fingers that that's the case, because I really, really liked his character in that first bit. And I mean, you can't really tell much of his character from the messages, and I'll just leave it at that. But man, that first bit, that was, I really, really liked that story. Okay, so moving along, what I really want to talk about today, and please, if you have any information on Foundation while I'm talking about what we're going to be talking about next, it rhymes with Dar Moon, sort of. I would love to hear it. So let me grab the notes real quick. And here we are. Okay. I have some pages open so I could remember names. I'm no good with names, as I have just proved. So, Barsoom. I really, really, really want to talk about Barsoom. So, in Weird Mask, in Weird Mask, issue 4, we have, we start doing Princess of Mars, or Under the Moons of Mars, by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Now, I don't want to talk really about each of these things really as a, like, an individual thing. I want to kind of try to talk about this as much as a giant piece as possible. So basically, in 1912, A Princess of Mars was released, and in All Story. Now, if you remember in the original podcast I was doing with this, I did talk a little bit about Frank Muncie and All Story, and I think I'm going to do that again and start hitting up actual different pulps and magazines and talk about their strengths, their weaknesses, their effects on whatever their main focus of genre was, and kind of the pop culture effect in the time. But so to give you a quick recap of John Carter. John Carter is a Confederate soldier veteran who goes west with his buddy to get rich with gold or something. Now, my paraphrasing is shit, so just bear with. Okay. While this is going on, there are some Indians, Native American tribe people who chase him. He goes into a cave. He finds some bodies. He takes a nap. He stands up. He's naked. His body's still on the ground. He looks outside, looks at Mars. Next thing you know, wham, bam, boom, he's out in the desert of Mars. Now, Mars, in these books, the people of Mars call Mars Barsoom. And it is a highly evolved world where it has evolved such a great deal that a lot of the resources are now gone, the planet's dying, and many of the different I guess the only way you could say it is races, different races of beings on Mars have kind of gone back to barbaric tendencies, I guess. So, like, if you look at it as kind of like a Mad Max thing, but on Mars a really long time ago, that might help. So, there's a bunch of different races throughout the stories, and they all have different, I don't want to say powers, but like, for instance, the Green Martians have 6 appendages and are really freaking tall. The Red Martians are very human-like, but then there's also these like blue Martians that are like plant people. There are the Black Pirates. There are the Clandanes, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They're like my favorite people in all of the books. Yeah, I could see Buckaroo Banzai a bit, I guess. Steve's throwing around $10 words like it's going out of style. So there's all these different people, and through the course of these 3 books, and with Planetary Romance as a whole, there is something you have to see. So like Edgar Rice Burroughs' whole thing with these books, they lay eggs. Yes. Oh, yeah, because we were actually going to talk about that in a bit. But yeah, they lay eggs. They don't birth. They have eggs, and they take like 5 years to hatch. It's really time-consuming and annoying. But let's see here. So the first 3... Oh, yeah, what I was going to say here is that these stories are a damsel in distress story. A guy sees a girl, and if he thinks for more than 2 seconds while looking at that girl, he will be in love with her, and by the end of the book, he should be able to take her somewhere, find out she's a princess if he doesn't already know, and then he himself will become like the king of something. So there's... I'm going to be giving you spoilers, but those are kind of what the spoilers are. So if you go in to these knowing that that's what you're going to get, it's just like if you're reading a detective story. You know before you get there that there's going to be a murder, and they're going to have to solve it, and at the end it's going to be solved, more likely than not. So it's the same thing with Planetary Romance. It's a damsel in distress, run around the world trying to save the chick you love, but you're on a different planet, and even though it's very far advanced, you're still fighting with swords. So that kind of deal. So the first 3 books, Princess of Mars, Gods of Mars, and Warlord of Mars, there are tons of collections that just have these 3 in them that are really nice. And I think actually, Fred, don't start. I think if you go to Barnes & Noble, there's actually a collection that has the first 5 books, which kind of works. And you'll see why in a little bit here. But let's focus on these first 3. So this is John Carter. And the thing about these books, too, is that Edgar Rice Burroughs puts himself into these books, and John Carter is like a kind of like a family friend who is telling him this story, so no one can say Edgar Rice Burroughs is crazy. In fact, when he first gave this story to All Story, he wanted to be credited as a normal being to let everyone know that he wasn't crazy. They screwed up and assumed that he meant Norman Bean. So on the original printing of this story in All Story in 1912, he was Norman Bean. But so the Princess of Mars, like, I have talked about this book so much. Boy ends up on Mars. Boy finds princess in chains. Boy falls in love with princess in chains. They want to go do something. They don't understand each other because of some weird cultural thing that he didn't understand. She gets really upset. He doesn't understand why she's mad. She gets kidnapped by somebody else. He has to go save her. And then at the very end, we find out that they really did love each other the whole time and everything's fine. But at the end of this book, he gets astral projected back to Earth. And for 10 years, he doesn't understand how to get back to Mars. And it's really frustrating, as it would be. So when the second book comes around, Gods of Mars, when he astral projects back to Barsoom, when he's there, he's not... we're thinking about Princess of Mars, that John Carter isn't an ordinary action hero. Okay, I will bring that up too. Because of the gravity on Mars, there are things that John Carter can do that other people on Mars can't. He could jump really high, he could jump really far. He's a lot stronger because he's had to live with Earth's heavy gravity. Mars has a much lighter gravity, so he's way stronger. He's super overpowered, and all that fun stuff. So that is something to... Mark's always wanted to be known as Normal Bean. Okay, so make sure you go over to Normal Bean's BookTube channel, Normal Bean Reads, and it'll be a lot of fun for you. Richardson Reads. So, another thing about Edgar Rice Burroughs' stories, there is so much coincidence that it's almost frustrating. Get that out of your head. Don't even worry about it. The coincidence is going to happen because fate is making this stuff happen. So, when John Carter comes back to Mars and he is in the Valley Door and down the river is, or however you say it, he runs into his old friend Tars Tarkas, who is one of the Green Martians, his best buddy, who helped him do everything he did in the first book. He has decided to go down there. Now, where this is like their heaven. This is their afterlife. When someone is just done, like they're going to check out, you don't just like put a blaster to your head or fall on your sword. You travel down the river and go to the Valley of Dor, because that's what you do. And nobody knows exactly what happens down there, but it is illegal. You would be put to death if you came back from there. So he finds it, and now this story is kind of crazy in the sense that he goes here, he gets caught by someone, he's in prison for a year. He goes here, he gets caught by somebody, he's in prison for 6 months. He goes here, he gets caught by somebody, he's in jail again. The amount of time that transpires in this book is really huge compared to the other books. But long story short, he goes down there. They find the Therns, who are white Martians, who are kind of like the gods. And they find the black pirates, who come and attack the Therns all the time. And then they find this chick called Isis or something like that. And she's just a chick, but the Therns thought she was like a god, so she kind of controlled them-ish by letting them hear certain things, and then they thought that all of this was real, and it's not, so whatever. But this book has the best cliffhanger ending of all time. I yelled and screamed. I audibly screamed when I finished Gods of Mars because I couldn't believe that that's how the book ended. And I immediately had to go out and try to find Warlord of Mars because I was not going to wait a minute to find out what happened next. Like, I had to know right then. So, in the interim of me trying to get that book, I came up with all these scenarios that I thought would happen in the next book. And then when I got the book and read it, I was kind of let down because I thought they were going a totally different direction, and they didn't. So, what happens in Warlord of Mars? A lot of fighting, a lot of political stuff between different, I guess, kingdoms of Barsoom. And then, at the end, John Carter is hailed as the Warlord of Mars. Now, one of the other coincidences in this story, I guess this actually happens in Gods of Mars, and one of the many times he's arrested, he finds this young guy that kind of looks like him, who turns out to be his son, Cathoris, that he's never met because he got sucked back to Earth. So that happens, and that's kind of a big deal. Okay, so Steve is bringing up a point in the chat about John Carter being immortal. Now, is he really immortal, or does he just not age on Mars? And since he's constantly going to Mars, doesn't age? Because I don't know which one of those is how that works. But every time anyone sees him, he looks like he did. Like, he doesn't get older. So I don't know. And how many body shells does the guy have? Because I'm assuming that when he came back or left, that his body wouldn't be there. But he says that after the fact, because he's looking back on what had happened. Because Steve says, on Earth before Barsoom, he says he's always been his present age and can't remember any childhood. He says he's been a warrior for centuries. Okay. Because I always looked at that as, because of everything that's happened to him since his first trip to Mars, basically, he doesn't really remember any of his life. Yes, he's the Highlander. He's the only one except for Ulysses Paxton, which we'll talk about in a minute. So anyway, so that trilogy of books there is kind of like one giant heavy story. Because it really takes him up and through Warlord of Mars before he even gets his chick back. So it's kind of a big story. And then Thuvia, who was also a prisoner with Dejah Thoris, she's another princess from another kingdom. Cathoris falls in love with her. And so the fourth book in this series, Thuvia Maid of Mars, is about them two, which is cool. Here's the thing. I think when I read Thuvia Made of Mars, I didn't like it as much because it wasn't John Carter. I totally, like, even though the John Carter stuff was so repetitive and just boom, 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 same stuff was happening, but kind of different because of all these different types of Martians and blah, 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 blah. I was all in and I loved it. So when Thuvia came around, the fourth book, and the book is being told in third person and not coming from John Carter's mouth and all this other stuff, I felt like something was missing from the book. Now, if I would have known that John Carter would be back as the lead of a book, I may have been a little easier on this book, but I think because of the order of how I read these books, I came down hard on this book because this has been my least favorite book out of all of them, but I feel like I need to go back and read it again. So when we get to Chessmen of Mars, is this... Yeah, because Chessmen of Mars is with the daughter, Tara. Now, this book, for some reason, and I have an idea why, this might be my favorite book in the series. Now, Tara, she finds out she's gonna marry, or not be forced to marry, but it's kind of looking that way, this guy named Galan of Gathol. And she... Okay, think of Spaceballs. Do you remember in Spaceballs when the Princess Leia-ish character was supposed to marry this, like, Prince Valiant guy or whatever? And he was just, like, awful and had, like, this awful haircut and just dressed super kind of flamboyant-y, but like odd. That's how I picture Galan. And so anyway, she's like, screw this, I'm out. I'm gonna jet. She gets on her flyer in the middle of the night, flies out. She ends up in a storm, and she ends up in this place called hang on, I have it written down here. Bantoom. Okay, so she ends up in Bantoom, and she's in this place that is kind of ran by the Clandanes. Now, or the Caldanes. Now, the Caldanes are these, like, heads with crab legs. And they have these things called Rykors, which are human-looking bodies with no heads that eat out of the hole in the neck. And whenever they need to, like, get somewhere, they just jump on one of these Rykors and their tendrils and their legs grab the spinal column and control the body. So if the body gets hurt, they just ditch it and get another body. Guy, girl, whatever. Now, the images that were put in my head from this book are probably the strongest images I've read in any of these books. So I'm on top of that. While the dogs are barking, I'm going to come over here and look at the chat. Let's see. Are they the only ones? I've always imagined a steady stream of Earthlings transporting to Barsoom over the ages. You would think that that would be the case, because when it was just John Carter... Hang on. When it was just John Carter, that would have been fine, and I would have been, like, completely okay with it just being John Carter. But when Ulysses comes in and does the exact same thing, it made it seem like anybody could do that. And if you've seen the slightly god-awful Disney movie, that instead of being called like Mars or Under the Moons of Mars or anything about Mars, they decided to call it John Carter, which was just the stupidest thing in the history of forever. But in that movie, they make it look like every human is just like a couple steps away from being able to jump back and forth between the two planets. Let me see. Thuvia Made of Mars is so good. Yes, our main cast of characters isn't there, but still. Now, the thing that Thuvia has for it is that Thuvia and Cathoris are in it. So it still feels like the story moving forward, but it's not like a first-person story. And even though the first 3 Barsoom books they are first-person, because Edgar Rice Burroughs is like, oh, and this is his story. I'll let him speak now. But it's like first person, and then we go to third person. So the whole feel, everything about the book just like spun me there. Edgar Rice Burroughs has done that before. Yes. He does that in the Tarzan books. He does that in the Pellucidar books. But yeah, I wonder what's going on with the Highlander property rights. Right for remake. Prime material for NaNoWriMo. Is fanfiction even allowed? NaNoWriMo, I'm sure fanfiction's allowed. They don't read what you do unless you like submit it for like a prize or something, right? So yeah, so you guys talk about Highlander. I'm gonna keep talking about chessmen here. So basically, they keep Tara because they're gonna eat her. But there is this one Kaldane named Gek who loves her singing voice, and Gek is going to help her because he doesn't want her to die. So Gahan, he somehow or another crashes his flyer in the exact same place that she crashed hers, and stumbles upon Bantoom, and he's all messed up looking because he's been out through the hell hole and all this other stuff. So when she sees him, she doesn't recognize him. So instead of doing anything else, he's like, oh yeah, I'm a warrior named Turan. So he lies about who he is because she really didn't like him, and he knew she didn't like him. So it's like this whole, it screamed when I read this, the whole Padme Queen Amidala thing with Star Wars. And honestly, the more I read, the more I see how many things George Lucas stole from every single person who ever lived and wrote a book. But that's okay. So anyway, then they end up in this place called Manitor, and there's so many great scenes with Gek. It's so much fun. It's such a cool book, and I love Gek so much, and I'm so pissed that we never had like a Gek book. Maybe I will take up the call and do a buddy cop book on Barsoom with Gek and Woola. Oh my gosh, that would be the greatest thing ever. Imagine Gek with his crab legs wrapped around the body of Woola, running through the Barsoomian desert. Oh my gosh, I'm sweating. So anyway, then we go to Mastermind of Mars. Now this book is also really cool, but this is the first huge deviation in my mind from the story that is the whole Barsoomian tale. In this one, we have a guy named Ulysses Paxton, who, just like John Carter, astral projects to Mars, ends up in this town, meets this crazy mad scientist guy named Roz, and Roz brings him in and kind of takes him under his wing, teaches him all about Barsoom, the ways of it, and then slowly but surely starts having him help him with his experiments and what he does for business. And what he does for the business there is when people get old in this region, they pay him to put their brain into a young body. Now, the question is, where do these young bodies come from? And they steal them. And take the brains out of the young bodies and put them into the old bodies. So they're not killing them, they're just changing their life a bunch. So in typical fashion, Ulysses, whose name has been changed to Vad, falls in love with the girl who becomes this old, hideous woman. The cool thing is that he's still talking to the girl he loves, who's trapped in the old woman's body, and he promises her that he's going to go get the body and redo the operation and everything's going to be fine. Which, what do you think's going to happen? Of course. But it's really, really fun. A Fighting Man of Mars, which is the next one. This is the one that if you were to say, is there any Barsoom book I could go without reading, I would probably say the Fighting Man of Mars. Reason why is because this is so odd. So Ulysses from the last book comes up and sits down to tell Burroughs a story about this dude named Tan Hadron. Okay? And it is just it's a fun story, but it's not crucial to everything else that happens. But the thing in this story that makes this amazing and why I like it is because the Pellucidar books are my favorite Edgar Rice Burroughs thing. The Pellucidar novels they take place in the center of the earth. There's this whole other world down there. It's just, I really, really like it. I don't know why, but that's my favorite bit. And the way that Ulysses tells the story is he's relaying it to Earth on this thing called the Gridley Wave, which was brought up in Tanar Pellucidar, which is the third Pellucidar book, I want to say. And so it takes Pellucidar and Barsoom and brings them together. And then in the next Pellucidar book, it's Tarzan at the Earth's Core, which brings Tarzan in. So now we know Tarzan, Pellucidar, and Barsoom are all in the same universe. And I was just talking about that with Foundation, but I really, really liked that here. So that's pretty important. And then one of the coolest things ever, John Carter's back. Now, John Carter comes back for Swords of Mars. This book is fun. It's not great, but it's fun. And some of the things about it that are cool is, again, he's trying to find his chick. His wife, Deja Thors, gets kidnapped. Shocker. But when he's out looking for her, he's at a place in Mars where no one knows him really. And so he takes on like this identity of just like a mercenary, like just some like badass, hire me and I'll do whatever you want, you know, whatever. And that's kind of cool. And then the other part about this that really is fun is that they also go to the moon, like one of the moons of Mars, and it is Thuria, which is Phobos. So, and then there's like a whole other like civilization of people there. It's just there are things here that make it different, but it's still the same. And again, read it. Synthetic Men of Mars, which is the next one. This is the 9th book in the series. What makes this one really fun is we have Roz come back, the evil scientist from Mastermind of Mars. But this is kind of a cool way of storytelling here. We have Vordaj, who is one of the personal guard of John Carter, and he's telling the story. So now John Carter's in this book, but from like a third person perspective. And seriously, it took getting used to. I didn't like jump on it right away. I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this. And like, I had this weird like force like pushing me back from it. But once this book gets going, it's really cool. So now this time, instead of Deja Thoris being kidnapped, she's injured in an accident, okay? And the only person who can fix her is Roz. Now, Roz went kind of into hiding after what happened in Mastermind. He ends up in some other place and kind of free to do whatever the fuck he wants. So he's doing stuff, and he starts making these like crazy abominations of nature, and just like these like grotesque giant creatures. And one of these is really, really smart and really, really strong, and basically takes over this kingdom and then forces Roz to make him an army so he can take over Barsoom. Okay? So right there by itself, just stop. That is a great plot. We don't need anything else. But what ends up happening is that Vor, who the member of John Carter's personal guard, he gets his brain put into one of these like monstrous bodies and assumes that his human body has been destroyed, and he is falling in love with this chick whose name is Jenai. And he knows that she'll never love him because he's this hideous, grotesque monster. But he's going to try to rescue her anyway. So John Carter and Roz go back to Helium. Roz fixes Deja Thor's. And Vor and the Janae like go through all of these like adventures just trying to escape the city. And then at the end, John Carter shows up with like a gajillion ships, and he's like, I'm gonna blow you all up, and everyone's like, ah, and so that's kind of cool. So before I move on, let's see what the chat's doing. Okay, so fan fiction is okay in NaNoWriMo. Okay, so now Steve could finally write that book about Taft getting stuck in the bathtub. So that's gonna be exciting. Highlander Chessmen. Let me see. How would that work? Let's do Highlander Synthetic Man. That would be kind of fun. Getting back to Barsoom, why do you think ERB decided to make so many of his Martian races biologically immortal too? Why do the Red Martians live basically forever until they're killed? I don't know. From a standpoint that holds absolutely no water at all, I would say, and that's kind of a pun here, that because Mars is a dying planet, that the people on it live a lot longer, to help populate the planet in hopes that they could turn the planet around. But I don't know. With common knowledge, you would assume that they wouldn't live longer, and that they would actually live shorter lives than Earth people. But I don't know why. So anyway, let's see here. I had no idea there were so many spoilers in here. There are a lot of spoilers, but planetary romance kind of in itself is a spoiler. So there's not really a whole lot you can do there. The old saying going around the convention scene in the 70s, George Lucas peered deep into the soul of science fiction and ripped off everything in sight. That's good. Him and Spielberg. Because, like, let me see. We have Jaws, Indy, E.T., Close Encounter. Like, every awesome Steven Spielberg movie was basically a pulp story. And there's not really a whole lot that could be said about that, other than that's exactly what it is. And he just churched it up and made it to where you could sell action figures of it. Okay, so Lana of Gathol. Now, Lana is the daughter of Tara and Gahan. So she is the granddaughter of John Carter and Deja Thors. Now, this is kind of a different book, and this is actually kind of more like the Foundation books now that I think about it. You have 4 like novellas or novelettes or what have you. They are The Ancient Dead, which was originally called The City of Mummies, The Black Pirates of Barsoom, Escape on Mars, which was originally called Yellow Men of Mars, and The Invisible Men of Mars. Now, these stories have, they all have Lana in them, or kind of mentioned whatnot, but they are little separate stories. And this was okay. I think if I read through all of these again, this would be my least favorite. And I would probably like Thuvia more. I don't know exactly why, but that's kind of where I'm leaning right now. And then, just to move things along here, the last book, John Carter of Mars, which is the 11th book in the series, is 2 stories, which are John Carter and the Giant of Mars and the Skeleton Men of Jupiter. Now, John Carter and the Giant of Mars, when it was originally published as kind of like a kid's John Carter book, it was actually called John Carter of Mars. And a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs aficionados did not think that he wrote this. It turns out that John Coleman Burroughs probably wrote this all by himself, but then Edgar Rice Burroughs revised it, edited it. They probably worked on it together, but it seems probably more likely than not than it was just John's book. The last book was, The Lana of Gathol was the last book to be released in Edgar Rice Burroughs' lifetime, and this book actually came out like 20 years later. So let me jump in here real quick. Also, at the peak of Barsoomian society many thousands of years ago, why wouldn't the Barsoomians have used their advanced technology to immigrate to Earth? they have spacecraft, they have thought-activated tech, they have radium as both power source and a kind of weapon, but then again, they'd be facing Earth's crushing gravity. That is probably, obviously I don't think they knew about Earth's gravity, but it would have been funny to see, like, all of them come out of the ships, and all of the, like, green Martians and them come out too, and then just crumple to the ground. That would be hysterical. If you're one of those people that like watching videos of people falling down, that would probably be an extremely humorous thing to watch. I feel dirty that I said that now. Now, so Skeleton Men of Jupiter is an Edgar Rice Burroughs written story, and was supposed to be the beginning of another book in the same vein as Lana of Cathal, where we have a bunch of little novelettes put together to make a book, but he died before he could, I guess, get to the next one. And this story is a lot of fun. I like it a lot, but knowing it's the last one and that there is nothing more after this really, like, broke my heart, because it was like I wanted so bad to see what was going to happen next, because it ends with him kind of just going off into an invisible house kind of thing, or trying to find his way out and out of there. But it's like nothing is, there's no conclusion, there's no wrap up, there's no happy ending, really. And when I was looking stuff up to talk about this, I saw that there are a lot of writers who have done endings for this bit of the story, this John Carter of Jupiter kind of things. And I never read any of them, but if anyone else has read any of them, if you have any recommendations, I would love to dive into these, because that is my my jam. So I'm really, really interested in that. All right, so definitely take a look at the Barsoom books. I'm going to almost guarantee that you have completely forgot all the story points I've hit so far. So that'll be easy for you to jump in and not feel like anything was ruined. But just remember the excitement in my voice and all of the fun stuff, okay? Because these are really, really good. Britt! And Britt's got a story in the new Weird Mask. Great segue. So yeah, if anyone wants the new Weird Mask, you could get it at weirdmask.com. And with that being said, I am going to make like a tree and split like a banana. So I guess I will see you guys another time. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. You guys have made this worth doing for a second time. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much for doing that. You guys are all awesome.